You ever have one of those moments where you feel like you're just hitting a brick wall? You're trying to wrap your head around something, maybe a deep spiritual idea, but your mind just feels blocked. It's so frustrating. Well, today, we're going to unpack why that happens, and we're going to do it by digging into some source material that says the answer, it's probably not where you think it is.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Why is it sometimes so incredibly hard to get these deeper truths? I mean, we read, we listen, we really try to get it, but it's like the signal just isn't coming through clearly. What is actually going on inside of us when that happens?
All right, so here's our game plan for getting to the bottom of this. First up, we're going to look at that link between our mind and our spirit. Then, we're going to play detective and follow what's called a chain of corruption right back to the real source. That's going to lead us straight to the heart of the matter, literally. And finally, we'll look at how all of this stuff shows up as some very real everyday symptoms.
Okay, let's dive in. And we're going to start with the most obvious suspect, the mind. I mean, it's where we think and process everything, so it totally makes sense to start our investigation right there. So what is this critical link between our thoughts and our spirit?
Well, the source material does not mess around. To get straight to it, a closed mind leads to a closed spirit. Simple as that. The two are so interconnected that if our thinking faculty is blocked or shut down, our spirit feels that impact immediately. They're basically two sides of the same coin.
Now, to really get this, we've got to understand a key term from the original Greek, and that word is nous. So the source defines this not just as a passing thought, but as the organ of the mind itself. Think of it as your mental hardware. It's the whole apparatus.
And this is a brilliant way to explain it. If the nous is the organ, the actual physical eye, then noia is what it does, the act of seeing or understanding. See, you can have a perfectly healthy eye, the nous, but if something is blocking the light or making things blurry, then its function, the noia, is darkened. It seems like our problem starts here, right? But, as we're about to find out, this is only a symptom of something much deeper.
So, if a darkened mind is just a symptom, how do we find the real cause? Well, we follow this chain of corruption. I want you to picture a line of dominoes, okay? We're about to trace the chain reaction all the way back to see which domino was the very first one to get knocked over.
And here it is. The core of our investigation comes from this one passage in Ephesians. It lays out a sequence, right? You've got a darkened understanding, being cut off from God's life, and it's all because of the hardening of their heart. Now, the order of events here is absolutely everything. And here's that domino effect, laid out step by step. And this is the big reveal. The source material argues that this whole problem doesn't start with our thinking. No. Look at step 1. The heart hardens. That's the first domino. That hardening is what causes the separation from God's life. And it's only after that that our understanding gets darkened and our mind feels empty. See? We've been looking at the last domino to fall, but the problem starts way, way deeper.
So the whole point, the big aha moment is this. The disease begins with the heart. All those mental blocks, the spiritual fog we feel, they're just symptoms. The root cause, according to this analysis, isn't a problem with the head at all. It's a problem with the heart.
Okay, so this brings us right to the heart of it all. If the heart is where the problem starts, it stands to reason that it's also the place where belief and unbelief are actually decided. So let's look at the evidence the source gives us for this idea.
First up, we've got a quote from the Psalms. Now, pay close attention to where this unbelief comes from. It doesn't say, the fool reasoned in his mind or thought in his head. It says he said in his heart. Unbelief is presented as something that comes from our very core.
And you know what? It works the exact same way for belief. On the flip side, the book of Romans tells us that it's with the heart that a person believes. So it's not just about agreeing with facts intellectually. It's a deep conviction that lives in the very center of who we are. And this really drives the point home. The source points out the very specific language used in the book of Hebrews. The scripture calls out an evil heart of unbelief. It never talks about a wicked, unbelieving head. That distinction is so important. It tells us the issue is rooted in the heart, not just in the intellect.
All right, so if the real problem is in the heart, what does that actually look like? In the real world, how does this idea show up in our day-to-day lives, in the way we think and act? Let's get practical.
So here's the main idea in a nutshell. When we have issues with our mind, that confusion, the racing thoughts, the inability to grab hold of truth, that's the symptom. The real underlying cause that we need to deal with is the condition of our heart.
And the source gives us a list of some really concrete symptoms. Notice how some of them are about how we deal with other people, like, arguing just to win instead of to learn, or just not being able to really listen. And then others are totally internal, like a mind that's either racing out of control or feels completely passive and you can't make it focus. Even something like forgetting things unnaturally is listed as a possible sign of a deeper heart issue.
Let's just zoom in on that inability to listen for a second. We've all been in a conversation with someone, or maybe we've been that someone, whose mind is clearly just revving its engine, waiting for a pause so they can jump in and object. Well, according to this analysis, that's more than just a bad habit. It's a sign of a heart that's closed off, a heart that's postured to defend, not to receive.
So, where does that leave us? What's the takeaway here? The conclusion of this whole chain of logic is actually pretty simple and direct. If you want a clear, renewed mind, if you want an open, sensitive spirit, you can't just treat the mental symptoms. You have to go to the source. You have to start by addressing the state of your heart.
And that leaves us with one last really challenging question. This isn't about how smart you are or how much you think you know. It's about looking right past all the mental noise, past the frustration, and asking a much deeper, more fundamental question. What is the true condition of your heart?